Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Cuson. As always, here joined by Brian. We are going to be discussing in our continuing Sergio September. We are going to be discussing what many consider to be one of the greatest westerns of all time. Perhaps only topped by what we're going to be discussing next week. This week, we are going to be discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly. Please leave a 4 or 5 star review so as people can discover the show. In addition, we request that you click the bell icon and subscribe on YouTube by clicking on the bell icon. You can see when our videos go up live, and that is pretty great. So, Brian, we are going to be discussing, of course, the third movie in the Man with No Name trilogy. Last time out, we got to discuss Lee Van Cleef. This week, we get to discuss Eli Wallach. Eli Wallach is a pretty famous actor in his own right. And I don't know if you realize this, Brian, but Eli Wallach actually appeared in Mystic River as well.
Not only that, he was the bad guy in the Magnificent Seven. So he fits this role so perfectly based on that one previous casting. And not only that, I think some of that Brooklyn, New York kind of vibe to him that he kind of brings to the table, even though he's playing a Hispanic character, like he brings that to the table and it kind of adds a little nuance to his character. So, man, I don't know what it is about this casting. I know it's a little iffy in terms of the racial casting back in the 60s, but man, I love this casting, and he's so good in this role. Such a great actor. And little known fact that he almost died making this movie because the train sequence where he's laying his head down trying to break the chain from the other guy who's dead. If he would have waited 3 more seconds, the steps of the train would have chopped his head off.
Absolutely. This is a movie that it is the longest of the three movies. And I do have to say, I think there's a couple notes that I want to make. The way that what this movie actually builds to, with this is a three-way dance. Like this is actually, like, to me, I don't know if Paul Heyman was a huge fan of this movie, but when they're doing the ending confrontation, it absolutely comes across like you would see a three-way dance, like in ECW or even some of the early WWE ones with the three of them facing off. So the actual build up to the ending is really great. I don't know if you want to address that just very briefly. I have a couple more things that I want to note before getting into kind of the meat and potatoes.
Well, the buildup is interesting because, as we mentioned before, in terms of the timeline, this is actually a prequel to the previous two movies. So you see, like, the establishment of this character, the man with no name. Like, he's a bounty hunter, but he's kind of like screwing around and then like letting Tuco get away with it, and then they go to the next town and then do the whole thing again, and then do the whole thing again, and kind of rip off each town for the wanted thing. And then it kind of builds up to this treasure, this MacGuffin, right? This treasure of the Sierra Madre, not the Sierra Madre, but it's one of those treasures, right? And they find this guy. The guy tells them where it is, but then he tells Clint Eastwood where the name of the grave is, where to dig. So now they have to rely on each other to work together. So now you got this guy that doesn't trust Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood doesn't trust this Tuco guy because he's a murdering son of a bitch. But they've been working together for so long now. And then you throw in Lee Van Cleef, who was hired to find the name of the grave for this other person who's looking for the treasure, ends up killing him. So now we got three parties all invested in finding this treasure, and somehow they kind of all meet at the same time, based around this one, I guess that Civil War Yankee hub, right? That they got caught in, and that's where they kind of merged together.
Right.
And Lee
I
Van
mean, the
Cleef
thing about
finds out.
Sergio Leone, like the thing about Sergio Leone that people I think really need to understand, and I think I may have brought this up either last week or the week before, but because of the way that he saw soldiers behave in Italy, he has a severe distrust of soldiers, not just Italian soldiers, not American soldiers, just a general distrust because of what he witnessed in his own country after World War II. So that informs everything he does, and it's going to be even more underlined and pronounced next week with Once Upon a Time in the West, but you get some of that in this movie as well.
Especially Lee Van Cleef going undercover as a Confederate soldier just so we can kind of find this guy's name to find the money. But at the same time, he's like torturing all these poor Civil War soldiers coming through and just torturing every single one of them and just getting away with it. And again, it's that distrust of soldiers. There's this theme of like the Civil War in the background of this movie, which we talked about before, but like it's really, they really bring it to the forefront in this movie. There are so many extras in this movie that you can't even count them all. Like compared to how many people were in the first movie, maybe like a dozen people, right? Now it's like dozens and dozens and dozens of extras to do these war scenes. And it kind of puts you in that time frame. It's like the Civil War. You have bounty hunters in the middle playing both sides. And there's this distrust of the soldiers, both Union and Confederate. Um, and basically, the bounty hunters are just kind of using both sides to get what they want, to gain their whatever advancement, and then you got Lee Van Cleef doing the same thing. So it all builds up to this three-way dance, so to speak, in the middle of this cemetery that's iconic. And
I mean,
Eddie Kingston uses the
the
theme.
scores, I mean, the score for that. I mean, if it wasn't shot beautifully, it also might have one of the best singular scores ever produced.
Yeah, and you can tell like a lot of filmmakers, a lot of wrestlers, you know, have used that kind of the music from this movie as inspiration, remixes, so to speak. We've got so many remixes of The Ecstasy of Gold. I've heard so many times on the indies, and of course, this idea of the way it's shot and the cinematography and like the way that the use of close-ups. It's like we hardly see that anymore with the use of like facial expressions and eyes and expressions and close-ups to tell a story. And I know like a lot of talented filmmakers still do it, like Quentin Tarantino, obviously, but it's so far and few in between that we see these techniques anymore. Because I don't know, I guess
Yeah,
everything is
it's pretty
kind of
bad.
like generalized, and just let's get this. It's the Hollywood machine. Let's get it done faster. Let's not do all these extra close-ups when we don't need to. But in this case, it just builds and builds and builds, and the music builds and builds and builds until this one final moment where everything goes down at the end. Spoiler alert: Lee Van Cleef dies. Um, Tuco actually survives, but his fate is unknown based on him being abandoned in the desert. But
I
but
mean,
that's
he's
not.
a survivor though. Like to me, that the whole gimmick of Tuco is he is
He's a
a
survivor.
survivor. Like
Yeah.
he is going to somehow escape that desert, but like he's gonna make it. Like because that's who Tuco is. Like Lee Van Cleef dies because he ultimately has too much pride, but Tuco has no pride, and that's why he's able to live, and that is very much consistent with Sergio Leone's worldview. I would say that somebody like Tuco could survive, but that somebody I don't want to say with honor, but like you know what I mean. Like he has a very specific way of living his
It's
life,
like a
and
cockroach effect. The cockroach will just live no matter what, right? Like
no, I mean
throughout.
that's probably true.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe you're supposed to get. I get that, but it's also this tragic tale, and I think he's the only one that gets a real background in this movie. Um, and I think that story with him and the priest being his brother and that whole background—that's like my favorite scene in the movie, to be honest. Outside of the ending,
It's a
because
really
it
good
feels like,
scene.
yeah, it feels like that's where we get this deep drama that kind of gets glanced over in some of these Sergio Leone movies. You probably
I
get
mean,
more of that
I,
in New
I
York.
think I don't think Sergio Leone gets enough credit for being able to do melodrama really well. And again, when we talk about Once Upon a Time in the West, that's going to become even more pronounced. But then, like if we did Once Upon a Time in America, I would kind of go the other way because I think that movie like crosses the line. Part of it's being that it's 3 hours and 40 minutes, but I think this movie has just enough melodrama to really keep the movie going. And yeah, I would agree that again, to me, I think there are a lot of really good parts to this movie, and it's really hard, I think, to talk about like this movie in terms of like comparing it to the others in terms of quality, because I think this movie has the best scenes, the best score, the best ending, but there's 20 minutes of this movie that we could easily cut, and I'll let you get into that.
So there's this scene where they have to cross this bridge in order to get to the cemetery. But this bridge is being occupied by both Confederate and Northern soldiers from both sides. So it's kind of like the World War I kind of vibe in the trenches, but instead of a trench and instead of the battlefield, it's a bridge. And this dude is completely drunk, like totally just off his rocker drunk, and he's just drinking the whole time. And that's kind of one of those other perspectives of war where it's like the insanity and chaos of war brings you to the point where you're just drinking every day, kind of like we talked about in Mash. So
Yeah.
that's very relatable. So in this case, he's just like, you know what, you're here. You want to get rid of the bridge too. I want to get rid of the bridge. Let's just get rid of the bridge. And then he drunkenly just sends his soldiers off to fight while in the background, Clint Eastwood and Tuco blow up the bridge. but it just feels like you don't need this at all. I think he was just this I don't know. I hate to say like over the top trying to show off kind of thing. Um, you know, um, Appeasing your own like directing efforts. You know what I'm saying? Like putting himself
Right.
over for these 20 minutes. Just like I can do this and I can put all these people on screen. I'm such a great director. I think he took his ego way too far with this 20-minute sequence because you could just literally cut that sequence out and cut to Tuco landing next to the
So I
grave, and it would have just
really
been perfect.
so at this point, the only version that I think is available is the 2 hour and 57 minute one. But there was a version that is like closer to 161 minutes that I guess was the original American theatrical release. I really wonder if that's the sequence that gets cut from the 16 minutes or so.
You know what's funny is I remember watching the DVD when I was younger and reading about that, but nowadays it's kind of become the centralized version, this longer cut. And I
Which I
did notice
understand.
too,
Like
yeah,
if this is the director's preferred version of it, even if I don't like it, I would prefer to see that version than to see it without it. Like I know that seems contradictory, but like to me, the director's vision is what it is, and I would rather see that than anything else.
for sure. And I noticed too they had to redub some audio, and I had to look that up, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that from the original DVD. They talked about that. So there's a scene where I think they're about to get caught by the Confederate soldiers, and they're talking on the horse or whatever, and they had to redub the lines. You can kind of tell, like, oh, that's Clint Eastwood from like the 2000s, and then that's like, oh, that's Eli Wallach from like the early 2000s. You can tell their voices are older. But other than that, like to cover up some audio, I think it's still like for a director's cut. It's probably one of the better ones considering what we've seen. But it's kind of notorious for Sergio Leone because of the story about Once Upon a Time in America. So, and that story with there is like completely took an hour and a half out of his cut, released it theatrically. It got panned by the critics, and then later on they released the director's cut. And famously, Gene Siskel, went out and said this is one of the best movies I've ever seen. This version of the movie, and completely like desecrated the original cut. So, I can
Right.
see why that Sergio Leone was like, "Oh, we're doing a DVD release. We're doing my cut," and that's been the cut that's been the Blu-ray, the 4K, and all that. So I can see why that's kind of been the preferred version. But I just can't recall seeing this other version ever. But I guess that's kind of like what happened with Mallrats. Sometimes when you stream Mallrats, you'll get the director's cut without them asking you for the director's cut. If you've noticed that. And I think they do that with Superman too sometimes. Like sometimes you have to specifically put the theatrical cut versus the Donner cut, because if you're not paying attention, you're going to get the Donner cut. So in that case, yeah, this
I
is the
could see
definitive
that.
version. Yeah.
I mean, it's
But
weird. Like
it's
I just
long.
got
It's long. That's the thing. It's too long.
Is this where so Mexican standoff? I know that's a phrase that gets used a lot with Tarantino because you know Reservoir Dogs ends that way. True Romance, which he did not direct, but he wrote, ends that way. But here we have a Mexican standoff that's kind of just the three people. It's the same concept, right?
I mean, you have guns, we have guns. That's a Mexican standoff. I'm not sure which exact movie the trope comes from. I'm sure it may have been a spaghetti western around this time that was ripping off Sergio Leone, because there is another director around this time named Sergio Corbucci, which Burt Reynolds famously or infamously signed up to make his movie thinking he was working for Sergio Leone, and then couldn't get out of the contract and ended up making the movie with Sergio Corbucci. But yeah, there's a lot of like copycat directors around this time. Not that they're like bad, because I've seen some copycat spaghetti westerns around this time, and one of them has Lee Van Cleef, and it was still really good.
Lee Van
So
Cleef, like this is his second career. Like he just goes and makes a bunch of
yeah,
these. I understand. Like I get it. Like especially for somebody who was struggling, and like these are the movies that kicked his career off. Like if this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do. I mean, Clint Eastwood kind of went the other way, and he did do a few westerns, but like his career is primarily known, I would say, for Dirty. Like to me, I always associate him more with Dirty Harry at this point than as the Man with No Name. Even though I think, especially in the DVD and the Blu-ray era, like I definitely think that these movies have gotten a lot more credit than probably they used to. But I mean, to me, what the first line in Clint Eastwood's obituary, whenever it gets written, he's going to be cited as Dirty Harry first.
yeah, because the Man with No Name is still a little too long to put it as an opening name too. But still, like this mythos that this trilogy has created, I think Tarantino has certainly helped that. This
I mean,
idea that this
it's
movie is bigger than
incredibly
it is.
influential on movies. I mean, I think
Yeah,
that
and from what it is, like he's speaking from the truth and he's speaking from the heart. Like a lot of people at the time did not notice the strength of the directing at this time from this movie. And then as you go on, it's like how wow, like this movie has some strong directing so much so that it's influenced modern day directors, right? So, and we'll talk about that for Woo, Woo November. I'm not going to reveal which Woo, but I mean, even in that, it's like it's clear as day. It's like these cinematography shots that are established in these movies are used to this day because I mean, if you look at the opening of Inglourious Basterds, a lot of people compare that opening to the opening in this movie where we first see Lee Van Cleef, right? That's kind of like a similar kind of vibe to
absolutely,
it. And it's clearly influential in like Tarantino's work. So it's just like an amazing like way to kind of compare and contrast. But if you also look at that scene, it's like, how did Sergio Leone look at these sets and come up with these shots? Because if you look at one of those earlier shots, it's like almost like you're going down the bullet of a gun or like the barrel of a gun, the way that the room is rounded in the foreground and the background. You know what I'm talking about with the Lee Van Cleef introduction, right? Where it's almost like
absolutely.
it's so weird how he finds these shot locations and just puts it on screen. It's like it's beautiful. And he just sees things. And I can clearly tell like it's almost like a metaphor of what that shot was supposed to be, like going down the barrel of a gun in this rounded kind of, architecture. So he's really got an eye. It's tremendous how he puts these shots together. And for us not liking those 20 minutes extra of the Civil War stuff, it's just this grandiose view, like wide shots of like war. You know what I'm saying? So he's definitely got an eye for war, and it feels like he was trying to do a little bit of what's the Stanley Kubrick movie? Paths of Glory. Like it had that vibe to it that he was trying to go for in terms of like the suffering of war, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't fit the theme of like bounty
I could
hunters
see
going for
that.
gold. So that's
I
where
mean,
I'm
I
kind of
think it
like,
works. I think this movie just works in a way that you don't really see. I think a movie like this could easily be a disaster, and the fact that it isn't is a testament to Sergio Leone as a director. And again, we can have our quibbles with certain aspects of this movie, but it still ultimately works. Like this is still as it should be regarded as an all-time classic, and this is probably my second favorite Western, only topped by, or maybe third favorite Western. I think I'm at like Unforgiven a little bit more than this, but I think that this movie is ultimately successful because of Sergio Leone and the way that you could see his directing evolve from one movie to the next. And part of it is because he gets more and more of a budget, but you're also seeing like the Clint Eastwood persona evolve as well. And even though we're supposed to kind of see this as the technically the first movie in the trilogy in terms of the chronological order, like the thing that impresses me the most about what they were able to do is the fact that Clint Eastwood continues to do these movies and, he sits out and wants his 250 grand, which I understand. Like, I get it. It's really hard to have the man with no name when you don't have the man with no name. So, he's got to get his money. But I think it's really impressive to see like who he becomes because I think in the first movie, I think you don't see him fully formed. I think at this point, like you're seeing him in the form that he is going to be in pretty much for the if maybe let's say the next 10 to 20 years. I would say. I mean, I think Old Man Eastwood is a little bit different, but this version of Clint Eastwood is the one that you're going to see 3 years later in Dirty Harry and in a lot of the movies and a lot of the westerns that he's going to be doing. Jersey Pale Rider and all that good stuff. So you're going to get a chance to see this version of Clint Eastwood for a number of years, and it's really impressive to see. And I mean, look, I think Eli Wallach and Lee Van Cleef do some great work in this movie, and they certainly deserve their plaudits as well because I think they could easily be forgotten, but they are essential elements to this movie. But like you can walk out of this movie and you still know that Clint Eastwood's going to be the star. It's really clear.
yeah. I have yet to watch the Dirty Harry series, but this has really got me hankering to watch it. And I
I mean,
went on
look, I
HBO.
think the
I went on HBO. It's not there. So what the fuck? I mean, they own the
I,
rights and they don't have it on their own streaming service. So I don't
really
know. I don't
stupid.
know.
I think I got some Blu-rays recently actually for not very expensive. So that is what I would recommend to anybody is to buy physical media. Um, but I mean, look, I think the Dirty Harry movies I think are a mixed bag. I think the first one, and I think you always have to understand that these movies are going to be incredibly problematic as well. But I think you also have to walk in understanding like this it kind of these movies are a time capsule, but even if they're problematic, there's still parts of these movies that work extremely well and I think are still worth seeing even with some of the issues.
For sure. And as of this recording, Eddie Kingston has accepted Big Bill's challenge um, for All Out Toronto. And I don't know if he's going to come out to Ecstasy of Gold or something like that because Tony already got the rights to use the first movie's theme. Like, God knows how many other themes he can get from this era that are just kind of like old school and dope. So you never know. I'm just saying he could come out to Ecstasy of Gold at the pay per view, and I would not be shocked. I'm just saying.
I mean, look, I think it's really unfortunate that the same corporation that owns AEW does not also own the rights to these movies because, I mean, don't you want to see John Moxley versus Eddie Kingston versus Hangman Adam Page in a good versus bad versus ugly match? Come
I know, and I've been thinking about this
on.
like they could do the vignettes like that too, but I don't know. But they've been like kind of picking and choosing what to do with their vignettes lately, so I respect that because it's very expensive to do something so theatrical like this. But you got to save it for a certain moment. So we'll see. Because I don't know. I was expecting some kind of Halloween tie-in with the upcoming coffin match at the pay-per-view, but I really haven't seen any kind of tie-ins like that yet so far. So because AEW is known for these tie-ins, so I'm kind of waiting for that as well. But man, that's kind of the ideal, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Those three. That's the perfect scenario right there. And we already know AEW is doing like $500,000 matches, $200,000 matches, so they know how to up the ante. So they know their MacGuffin, so to speak, in terms of wrestling terms. So they got that down. But yeah, this is definitely a movie that I mean, so many people have talked about generation to generation to generation, but it's something you got to experience on your own. Highly recommend 4K if possible. The streaming, I guess, is close to 1080p, but if you get that 4K, I think it's going to be over the top. And you really want to crank the sound up for the soundtrack, especially the scene in the desert. I think that scene is so hypnotic, the way it's
Yeah,
shot, and it's so like Tatooine-ish, but so like real because they have no CGI. So it's all, you know what I mean. So it's just Clint Eastwood walking in the desert, literally getting dehydrated and getting dehydrated and getting dehydrated to the point where his skin's falling off. It's incredible. But that
it's
scene
pretty
is just
gross, but
so
also
real
exhilarating at the same time.
because it's giant fucking desert dunes landscapes for real. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's incredible because you have to be in the middle of the desert to get that shit done, and they did it. No CGI.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a wild ride so far. It is a, I mean, this movie, if it wasn't for what we were discussing next week, this would be an unbelievable main event. But the movie that we are going to be talking about next week is somehow even better than this movie, Brian. Have you've seen Once Upon a Time in the West, haven't you?
Oh, like dozens of times. Like I've analyzed that movie. It's incredible, folks. It's just I think the big thing for me is this big twist at the end that no one sees coming and everyone kind of forgets about. It's like, what the heck is Charles Bronson doing here anyway? And the big reveal is so good. It's that Sergio Leone. It's like a Sergio Leone classic twist where you see this like twist of the story comes out of nowhere and everything just makes sense for the last 5 minutes, and it's glorious. And so Peter Fonda, that's the bad guy. That's a
Henry
whole
Fonda.
different.
Henry
Henry
Fonda.
Fonda. Henry Fonda. Sorry, I mix the family up a little bit sometimes. The royal family, I like to call them, of Hollywood.
Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson absolutely just killing it. You also got Jason Robards in. I mean, who doesn't love Jason Robards? I mean, I always associate him with All the President's Men, but I mean, he might be as good, if not better, than even that movie.
And he's not even like the antagonist. He's like the side character that gets blamed for shit because he just happens to have a gang. So
He's
there's
old
there's a lot
money.
to talk
That's
about.
what he represents, old money, and that's kind of the
Yeah,
purpose.
yeah. There's a lot of subtext going on in this movie. We're going to talk about it next week, but it's all about the railroad. Whether you agree or not with the whole concept of the railroad expanding America and taking us into the industrial age, a
It
whole
is
whole
about
bunch of
capitalism.
discussion. Yeah, and about survival. We're like really like survival in the old west. And you can tell Deadwood took a lot from this movie in particular, more so than I think the trilogy, because of the subject matter and
I mean, I think
just the
there's
way.
some. I think there is a lot of idealization going on. Even though I love Sergio Leone's Man with No Name trilogy, I think there's still some iconography and there's still some mythos attached to it. A lot of that gets stripped away in Once Upon a Time in the West, and I think Clint Eastwood would kind of do that on his own in Unforgiven. Even though they're two very, very different movies, I think there's a reason that I put those two on a higher pedestal than even the Man with No Name trilogy, which again, I think is still, I would say that in terms of like the traditional Western, I would say Good, Bad, and the Ugly is still the best. But I think you go beyond when you talk about Unforgiven and the movie that we're going to be talking about next week, which is Once Upon a Time in the West, which again might be the greatest Western of all time, might be one of the best movies of all time as well.
It does have one of my favorite artistic, metaphorical scenes of all time, and we'll discuss it next week in terms of a guy wanting to reach the Pacific Ocean but can never do it, but dies in a puddle of water. Think about that, folks.
All right, for Brian, I am Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.